Slap bass is one of those things that was kind of 1970s, early 70s, and all through the 80s was a big sort of slap bassy sort of era, and it can sound a little bit cheesy in nowadays music, but it's still a very, very important aspect for any bass player to know. So there are essentially, instead of playing with index finger and middle finger here, we're playing with the thumb and either the index finger or your middle finger. Doesn't matter which. I always use my index finger. So a very common thing to do is octaves. So the danger here is that you can start setting other strings off again, and it's actually worse when you do slap bass, because you really are giving it some with the right hand onto the bass string. So you're better off with this. If I was going to play an A here and hit my thumb onto this string, is to actually mute the other three strings with the back of this finger. There you go, there's no noise there. Now the physics of this, you have to imagine that your thumb is a piano hammer. What happens is you've got the piano string like that, and the hammer, the way that the key works is that the hammer has a rest point which is there, but the inertia of that hammer just briefly takes it to the string and brings it back. You want to replicate that with your thumb, because if you do this, if you try and slap it and leave your thumb down, obviously you're going to get no note, because you're just damping the string straight away. So having this, when you're aiming for a spot just above the string. What you can use this area as like a backstop for this part of your thumb. Like that. Now, some bass players slap this way. I never have, but it's something that you can do if you find it easier to have your thumb that way rather than that way. But the principle is exactly the same. So the slapping finger, your thumb rather, if you were to slap on the second string, you've got to find some way of stopping that one from singing like a canary. Otherwise it's just going to make you... It's aiming for that A string. However, you can use this part of your thumb to come down to the E string, so that you've got this part just lands very gently on this to stop it from moving. And then the two strings here, the D and the G, are muted with this hand here. So there's quite a lot to think about. If you think very carefully about the mechanics in the first, sort of few days of practice, actually you've done most of the work already. Now it's also very important not to do it too hard. You can break the string, but it doesn't actually give you much. It just sounds like a bit of a clattery mess. So if I take the volume down here, I've got a mic here which is picking up my voice. So it's not very loud at all. If I bring the volume back up, it's percussive enough. If I play it loud, it's alright, but it's less consistent, and also you'll end up with a blister on your thumb and you just can't play for a few days. So also you have doubles, a bit like the kick drum. If you got I don't know, the drum beat to Walk This Way. Lost the name of it there. It's my age. The drum beat goes dum gat g g g. you've got those two bass drums, ba-ba, in quick succession. And what you can do is you can replicate that on here as well. And it sounds better if the first of those two quick notes is muted. Oh. Like that. It's easier to do it when it's in context rather than doing it on its own. I'm just making excuses. And then the other finger pulls the string slightly, lets it snap back against the frets of the neck. Once again, this doesn't have to be loud for obvious reasons. If you do it too hard, you'll just pop a string. I've had the strings on this bass since, well, what are we, 2008? We're 2018 now. I think I've changed them once. So, you know, each to their own, of course. But if you're gentle, your strings will last forever. So there is just the acoustic sound of the bass. Hard, you're not actually getting much, again, out of that. Now, there are some sort of classic bass riffs, that Naked in the Rain, Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's a drum beat. There's a definite connection between the bass player and the drummer, and they are arguably the most important members of a band, because without a good bass player and a good drummer, the band is no good. Doesn't matter who you got. You could have some virtuosic guitarist who can play, you know, Paganini variations on an electric guitar at the front, giving it the big one. If the drummer and the bass player aren't there, the thing falls to bits. So you've got to make sure that you have to err on the side of simplicity with this, particularly with a slap bass. If it goes a bit too complicated, you just sound like a chump if it's something doesn't quite gel with the drums. So sounds much better than Notice also that the slap and the picking very often takes place across octaves. So you've got G here and another G there. Now notice, as in other videos that I've put up with bass riffs, using these four fingers on the frets here can be quite a stretch when you're low down. If all you're doing is octaves, then you could use index and last finger as opposed to index and annular finger. So also, when I've finished playing this note and I slap and I pick the next one, this one will lift off slightly, but it'll only lift off to mute the string. It won't lift off the string completely, so I'll still be touching it. The same goes for when I come back to slap this one will lift off. So I end up with a sort of a synchronization here. So that if I didn't do that, now that hammer on and pull, you can give the impression of playing faster than you actually are by actually offsetting what you're doing with this hand with what you're doing with this one. Once again, it has to have a context. If you're doing that all the time, the audience, the guitarist, the drummer, the singer will all in unison looking at the bass player saying, "Shut up," because it doesn't really mean a great deal. It's reserved for the one time in the gig where it's on the bass, and then you crack open your riffs. You bring your trump cards out, one of which could be that. So it would sound all right with just the drummer, but it's not something you want to do when somebody's trying to sing about, you know, a loved one. It doesn't really work. So what's happening there is I'm slapping the initial note, the C in this case, then I'm tapping the 5th fret on the string between the two that I'm playing with my right hand, and then playing the right hand, playing the top note with the pick on the right hand. Now you can do something that's in 3 here. If it's subtle in the middle, it can actually work all right. But once again, you know, you're sort of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and sometimes it's just not going to work. So you can also do 4s. All sorts of things you can do, but it's restraining the rhythm so that it always works with the drums. To that end, we have, for the first time in history really, a drum machine that is, anyone who's got an iPhone running iOS 11 has got an instant drum machine, a human sounding drum machine. 10 years ago, no, wasn't there. You had to have a drummer, or you had to sit and program or something. You can just put drummer on and just practice along with that, and it is the best practice tool for any bass player, is to practice with drums only, just getting that rhythm sorted. Because if you and the drummer, as I said before, if you and the drummer are in cahoots musically, the band is going to be really, really good.